Well, let's get started since we do have lots of questions ready for our panelists as we talk about building a business case and proving ROI for design systems. Hello, I'm Jocelyn, the head of community at Supernova. And if you haven't heard, Supernova is a design system platform that connects your design and engineering data so you can create, manage, document, and automate all of your design system things in one place. Before we jump into this panel, a few housekeeping items. One, the webinar is recorded and we'll share it with folks later this week. You can enable automated captions if you'd like in Zoom. And if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A function. Or if you want to share any anecdotes or opinions in the chat, please feel free to do so, as you all have been sharing where you are located and saying hi. But let's get started. Today, we are joined by an incredible lineup of design system experts and smarties to talk about building a business case and proving the value of design systems. So no matter what stage you are in your career, getting buy-in and telling the story of design systems is extremely important. And it's really the only way to get resourcing, budget, headcount, all of that good stuff. So let's get started with a round of introductions. So panelists, if you can share a little bit about yourself, including your name, pronouns, what you're currently up to, and how long you've been working with design systems, that would be greatly appreciated. We can start with Josh and then go in alphabetical order.
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Jocelyn. I'm Josh Clark-Hehem, and I lead a digital agency called Big Medium along with my partner, Brad Frost. And we specialize in helping companies, especially large, complex organizations, design for what's next and do what we call big design. So it's like figuring out what's coming around the corner and doing it at scale. Sometimes that's about metabolizing new technologies like AI. We're doing a ton of AI work these days. But also a lot of times it's around design ops of like, how do you sort of adjust to scaling up your design team? So we've been working on design system stuff and design ops with companies for over a dozen years now. Great to be here.
Hey, I'm Lauren LaPrette. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently working on the design systems team at Cash App. Prior to that, I was working on the systems team at Dropbox. And then before that, I was building out the first cross-platform, cross-brand design system for Expedia. So it's been about 8 years in total working on design systems. Prior to that, I was a product designer and a graphic designer. And I'm really happy to be here as well.
Hey everybody, my name is P. Joe Nori. Pronouns are he, him. I am currently at Instacart working on, believe it or not, their design system. And I've been working on design systems since about 2011 and exclusively since about 2016.
Very cool. Thank you all. Let me stop sharing my screen. Let's just dive right into it. And let's start talking about getting buy-in from stakeholders and securing investment in a design system, because not all folks are getting that investment. Sometimes people don't even have a dedicated design system team. So what are some strategies that you all have used to successfully get buy-in from stakeholders and secure that investment?
We're also polite. Well, I'm happy to jump in. I think there's sort of three things that I think about in this. And one is that this has to be a multidisciplinary effort to succeed, that it needs design and engineering and product and the participation of brand to work together toward a shared vision. So I think one of the first things is that you have to find allies across those disciplines and cultivate stakeholders in all of them. You know, design systems are platforms for collaboration, and so they have to be collaborative from the start. And so related to that, you know, and I think one of the biggest problems about design systems is their name, is that, you know, people understand them to be specifically about design. And so I find it helpful when you're thinking about getting support for investment is to talk about an investment. So to talk about it instead as critical front-end infrastructure. And like any good common infrastructure project, it ensures stability and efficiency and quality, and it needs to be funded like an infrastructure project. And so I guess that sort of leads to this third thing that I think about a lot, which is to talk about this literally as investment, as capital improvement. And I'm so sorry, I'm going to talk for just a second about accounting, which I know nobody here came here for, but I think it's really important. Folks who don't understand design systems may think of them as operational cost centers. So a convenience for internal teams, just tooling, an expense. And instead, I think it's really important to position the work that we do here as asset creation, not operational expense. And I think that's good storytelling. We're creating value, not a new operational expense. But it's also better accounting, because operational expenses are just like, they come out of your cash flow. It's like writing a check. So they ding the company's bottom line for the year. But if it's considered a capital expense, then on the books, the cost can instead be spread out over a digital product's lifespan. So 3 to 5 years. So just really quickly, if you're, I don't know, say $1 million project is an operating expense, the bookkeepers just take it out of cash flow. So you just cost the company $1 million before you can realize any benefits. But if the accountants call it a capital expense, then they consider that they have just acquired a $1 million asset with a 5-year lifespan, and they can amortize the cost over 5 years, $200,000 a year. So the balance sheet for the first year shows a $1 million asset with $200,000 expenses. So that's an increase of $800,000 in the company's net worth for the year instead of a $1 million expense. So magic, thank you, accounting. But my point here is, don't miss any opportunity to frame and fund the work that you do as value building capital assets, because it's not only savvy and timely, but it's also true, and it will resonate with the folks who will ultimately hold the purse strings. Accounting. Sorry to ramble about accounting first thing in the morning for some of you.
I think that I've spent a lot of my career in design systems trying to get an executive to care about the things that I care about. And what I realized was I actually need to find what they care about and anchor my story to what they care about. It's a lot harder to change an executive's mind than it is to like change your positioning on something to meet their mind. And really figuring that out can help you tell the right story about the value of design systems, whether that executive is caring about like speed or quality or a combination of the two or any other type of initiative. You can then essentially say like, let me help you look good. Let me help you meet your goals by investing in design systems. And I think that the challenging thing in our corporate worlds that we live in is that many executives can be like very short-term oriented, even if like the company is speaking about long-term initiatives. And so we're talking about things like infrastructure, investing in like platform stuff that can sound really long-term focused. And ultimately what they want is to look good and to have a good win under their belt. So essentially cater your story to them and get them to care about the things that you care about from kind of their position.
I mean,
I love that so much. It's just like good design is about persuasion, and we talk a lot about empathy for the users, and I think empathy for our colleagues and for the stakeholders is so important. I love that.
I think folks said everything that I would say. Don't sell a truck to someone who wants to buy a car. So if someone wants velocity and you're selling quality, that's probably a bad thing. The one thing I would say is that to add to that is find ways to objectify it. So if people ask, well, how much time are you saving? And your response is a whole bunch, that's probably not going to land that much. You need to find ways to quantify this so that there is some idea of the actual value that you're providing as opposed to touchy-feely words.
Yeah, I think bridging both what PG and Lauren are talking about, how have you guys aligned the goals and the initiatives of the design system and the design system team with those broader business objectives? So that quantifiable thing that business leaders care about.
I think one of the things, right, is that most business leaders, and especially when you get to the like C-level, really don't care what goes into making the sausage, right? They don't care about Figma comps or web frameworks or any of the artifacts that go to the sausage, the stuff that we really care about. They just want the sausage, right? It's the only thing that's important for a lot of stakeholders is what actually gets delivered to customers and what happens next. And that's where the value of a digital organization is realized, and the design system that supports it. So one of the things that I think is just really important is how can you, Lauren, I think you made a great point, is that infrastructure, long-term, down the road, it's like, yeah, but I got to ship tomorrow. Like there's a shipping culture, right? Especially when we're talking with product folks, that sort of saying, hang on, we're going to build this thing, it'll take a year, and then it might maybe provide some value to you, is not the story, right? The story is, how can we set this up, this design system effort up, to deliver value immediately? And so I think one of the things that we talk about, is we call these things champagne projects, is let's find really high priority strategic projects in the organization right now. What's most important project to the organization? And let's start building our design system by building and extracting the components for that project. And I call them champagne projects for two reasons. One, they're fancy, they're important, they've kind of got the attention of everybody in the organization right now. But champagne also comes in tiny glasses. You don't have to create the whole huge, vast bucket of components that will ultimately serve all experiences for your company. And in the meantime, everyone's sort of like, you got a little bit of what I need, but not everything that I need. If you start with filling up this little itty bitty glass of components, you've got 100% of like what this team needs. And that takes the work off the hands of the production team, so it accelerates that project. And you can gradually build out the system one important project at a time, and you're already demonstrating value. So it's not the kind of thing of, give me money and we'll talk about providing value in a year. It's like day zero, we're getting this done.
In my experience, if you follow like a typical company calendar or cadence, there's oftentimes a moment where company level goals are shared for the year, or sometimes it's like a 5-year plan. And what I like to do is take those and try and like figure out how that translates into a design systems initiative. I think that the most successful design systems teams align to company level goals rather than catering to like team level roadmaps of the teams that they support, because essentially it's like a tree. If you're sticking to that like rooted foundation of the company, you're less likely to like be at the whim of all these requests and all these teams that can really thrash you. And so my experience at Dropbox, one of the company level goals while I was there was essentially like acquiring a lot of different smaller companies, rebranding them, integrating them. I think that there were 5 companies that we acquired in my time there. And so there was always like this integration of acquisitions, rebranding HelloSign or other products like that, and being able to tell a story of why design systems enables that. There's speed that the velocity gained by using the design system to integrate these products or to rebrand these products was really a way that I was able to get buy-in and like anchor to these company level initiatives.
To add, I think, I don't know, I'm not a smart guy. So like, it really is just, hey, what are the priorities? All right, let's do those, right? Like, I think that to me is the easy part. The hard part is, because we are one level removed, is having anyone realize we actually effing worked on that. Because you got a feature team that's the star, and we're the background vocalist. And we're like, hey, we're singing too here. And so that to me is the bigger challenge of trying to make it clear how we contributed to that. And while also not trying to be that person that's like stealing the show, because that can be bad vibes as well. So it's a real tenuous line that you got to walk there to get a little piece of that pie to show that you're providing value.
Yeah. I think that's like such an important thing too, is like framing this as like a support organization. And it's like, I think that one of the challenges a lot of times for design system teams is like finding themselves somehow in a policing or compliance or no, don't do that thing, and sort of telling the story of how we're enablers. We're here to help you do your best work and provide the assets and platform to do that where possible. And as you say, PJ, to sort of take credit in doing that, but always in being sort of like in that sidekick supporting role for the product team as hero. How do we, as an organization, rally around delivery, and what is our role in that as design systems team?
Yeah, I love what PJ said about like the easy part too, because I think that many times a design systems team is led by design and engineering, and there's rarely like a PM involved. And so I think there's a ton of value in like taking a very like entry level PM course so you can understand like how much napkin math product managers are actually doing, and like it's not that hard to come up with numbers, and like don't make more work for yourself, make it just really simplified. And sometimes the math that PMs use and the math that you can use for storytelling is really just, or for design systems is really just storytelling. And so they can be really fuzzy, but it helps leadership kind of understand quantitatively what you're aiming for. And so like don't draw up your own OKRs or your own roadmap that's like totally out of line with what the company is like telling you that you're focused on, because then like you will get a lot of scrutiny for like, well, how does that map? And so just start by mapping, I would say.
If you want to have a fun conversation, ask someone like, how did you get to the fact that your feature just made $5 million? Then they're like,
Totally.
today's the one, like winter solstice. Like it gets really fun. So like a lot of this is all a big circus and parade, and we have to somewhat lean into it if we're gonna get a seat at the table.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of approximations.
Yeah.
I think
Also,
one of the things.
sorry.
Sorry, Lauren, go ahead. No, please.
PJ, what you said about the kind of the vertical team, the product team taking credit for a lot, like it is really easy for a company to celebrate that a team got like $5 million. And little do they know like how much support you are offering through office hours or channels or things like that. And I found that it's very challenging as a manager to try and like help people get promoted when there's like a fuzzy understanding of what was really owned by the system itself, because we're creating so much efficiency, because we're just like behind the scenes in the trenches. And I think that it's like on the manager or lead's job to really show what that impact has been. And oftentimes it's like exposing the unseen or like the unvalued stuff that goes on behind the scenes.
I think that's a great point too. It's sort of like money makers are easier heroes than money savers. And the big opportunity for design systems is in really significant savings. And Lauren, you mentioned the kind of the efficiencies a couple of times. You're totally right. It's like the storytelling there and the metrics to look at after the fact to continue demonstrating value is like, we got to market faster. We spent less resources doing it, whether that was time or money or people. And it's like that sort of savings, like we built 3 features this month instead of 1 because of this and so on. But I think there's also sort of the story of also that savings can be put toward other use, maybe shipping faster, or maybe innovation, right? That we now have space to solve new problems instead of solving the old boring ones. Like the design system will handle the boring settled solutions, go solve new problems. And I remember we were doing some work with Condé Nast, the publisher, gosh, it's probably almost 10 years ago now. And just really stuck with me that there was a design lead for Vanity Fair who was like, I've spent the last 15 years of my life designing the same pages over and over and over again. And, I think a lot of people can relate to that. How many, PDP pages have you done as an e-commerce designer and so forth? He was like, I want to solve new problems. At the time it was like, how do we do a paywall that actually works, that people will want to use and that makes sense? I want to design that, not sort of this, share buttons over and over again. So I think that sort of opportunity of being like, not only can we get real cost savings and faster shipping things, but at a strategic level, we can move forward to the next chapter of our product design because of this stuff, because of the savings that we're having. We'll be able to make more later. And I think that's being explicit about that is important, the value of that savings.
The new hotness in our industry is talking about quality and craft. What no one's talking about, how the hell are we going to pay for that? How are we going to do that when we're already redlining? There's a great example of how that happens. It's Toyota. So I've been reading a lot about Toyota has this thing called, they're super inventive about their names. It's called the Toyota Production System. It's their system for production. And they've been doing this since the 50s. Essentially, their only focus is on elimination of waste and efficiency. And what they do is they take all those gains and they throw it right back into higher quality parts, not letting things, go out the line if they're busted. So it does require an investment from leadership to say, hey, we're getting this extra time. Let's not just spew out more crap. Let's focus on quality. But if we don't have the time to create quality products, we're not going to create quality products. Systems enable that because we've dropped the cost of production to the point where if we're saving the company 30%, you can throw 20% back into quality and then, pocket the rest of the 10% for savings. But without that, then sure, let's ship 3 months later. Let's cost us more money. Let's, hire, 30% more people. Especially right now, we don't have that option. So I think one thing I'm trying to do to pitch quality is like, look, someone's got to pay for this. How do you plan to do that? Oh, hey, we can do that. This is how. Let us focus on efficiency and y'all figure out a process for quality.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're raising something that's like really important here too, is that the culture behind the design system matters. Do people care about quality? Is it always going to be like shipping at any cost, mounting technical debt, and so forth? I think a truth just to recognize kind of going into this is that high performing teams tend to have design systems, but having a design system will not make you a high performing team, at least not on its own, right? The design systems are a means to an end, not an end in themselves. And in fact, they tend to be the outcome of healthy organizations that have effective collaboration and a shared focus that rallies around delivery, as I mentioned earlier. A lot of organizations simply don't have that healthy culture, at least not across the board. And so one of the things that we focus on in our work is, how can you use the build and maintenance of a design system to create the habits or nurture the habits of cross-discipline collaboration, of system thinking, of quality, of infrastructure, of, organizational pragmatism too, of not being necessarily too tied to the perfection of the system and being flexible and pragmatic. Because having those things, not just the assets of the design system, is what delivers real value, is the hallmarks of a high-performing design team. So I think part of it is it's a little bit of a catch-22. Those qualities of care and craft and a long-term vision are important to supporting a design system. And hopefully a design system can help to reinforce those things, but the two tend not to develop without each other.
Josh, I think you make a great point about how there are many things that design systems culture can influence outside of the bounds of like the design system itself. And I think I've run into that a few times where executives think that the system is mature and done and it's kind of like running on its own. And now this team that solved this very challenging horizontal problem, this infrastructure problem or this platform problem, should now take this other thing that like executives kind of think is like infrastructure or platformy. And I think that I've gotten into tricky situations where, one, I need to remind executives that like the design system is never done. And also that just because we're good at this one thing doesn't mean that we are the right team to take on this other thing that might be actually very specific when you get down to the details and not as platform oriented or not as infrastructure oriented as one might think. So I've also seen the flip side where design systems kind of become like the dumping ground for successful infrastructure projects.
Super interesting. Yeah.
So y'all have touched and mentioned executives a couple of times. And I know for some projects, it's really helpful to have like an executive champion or this one person at the C level or VP level whatever, who really believes in the design system or what you all are doing. Have you found that to be true in your actual work? Is it important to have that champion at an executive level?
Yeah, I would say you probably need more than one. That it's sort of like a lot of times organizations are split up where, I'd mentioned that multidisciplinary thing of you need design, you need engineering, you need product. And a lot of times they sit and the reporting structure is totally separate. And so you need to have those bridges across those silos, because if only one of those groups, or even if only two support it, it will fall because there's not alignment among the three for this really end-to-end effort. So I think, yeah, you need executive support at certainly the director and hopefully the VP or higher level, and to chain all these things together, if you can get a C-level chief digital officer or CIO, sort of whoever's in charge of such things, to give their blessing, then everybody else will fall in line. Because ultimately, like we've been saying, it has to align with everyone's incentives. And will I be rewarded for supporting this or punished? There's just straight up business and politics to this of like, do I stand to gain? Does my team stand to gain, or will I be hurt?
Yeah, and I think the harder part is, yes, it's important to have it, but for folks who don't have one, or maybe only have not necessarily someone with as much, let's say, political power or political savvy, how do you get or find an executive sponsor or champion who will help you get into those rooms and fight that fight with you and for you?
I think it's super important to figure out who owns that power at the company. And not just like the person, but also the discipline. So sometimes that's product, sometimes that's engineering. In many places, we are trying to make it design. And so that person might not always be in your tree of managers. And so like, while you might be able to influence your manager or your skip level manager, they might not be the person that actually wields the power. And so I spent a lot of cycles trying to influence people that were in my reporting line or in the engineering reporting line. Ultimately, I realized that everything was controlled by product. And so being able to cater my story for product helped get on other people's roadmaps, which unlocked like a long migration because product was very invested in that story. The other thing I'll say about being like getting an exec champion is that like they're not going to care about your Figma library. They're not ultimately going to care about color tokens or any of the other things that you're spending all day thinking about. So like you need to figure out just enough detail for them to chew on that makes them interested. And so like if they are the executive sponsor of a specific company KPI or OKR or whatever you use, that can be really influential if you like cater your story and the level of detail of your story to like why it matters for them.
Yeah.
And then I know, Lauren, you mentioned like part of a job as a team manager and a team lead is helping folks on your team advance in their career. And a big part of that at organizations is having metrics or KPIs to show their specific impact and value. For folks who haven't had to like promote folks, there's usually like a number of people you can promote within like an organization, or even there's just a lot of politics that go around it. So there's a lot of managerial and skip level manager, like social capital, political capital, and all of that goes into it, along with that ROI stuff. So I'm curious, for design systems and folks that y'all have promoted or helped with that in the past, and in general, what are some metrics and KPIs that you have successfully leaned on and used to show the team or an individual's impact to make that happen?
Yeah, I have one scenario that I can speak to specifically that was particularly challenging as a manager because I was promoting them to such a senior level. And I think that design systems, and particularly like I am very oriented on internal users, while like promoting someone, oftentimes our career ladders are oriented towards an external user and impact on the external user. And so you kind of have to like continually ask yourself, like, why, like, why should I care? And think about the vantage point of the people that are like reviewing the promo case. In this specific scenario, I anchored to efficiency and also like efficiency as influencing product quality. For instance, this was really challenging because I was like having to show a lot of invisible work. The work required a tremendously large token migration that essentially changed all of our underlying foundations without impacting any of our internal or external users. And so I would relate it to like essentially we rewired an entire house without without the people living in the house moving out. And when we migrated to this kind of platform agnostic token system, which like allowed us to do theming and roll out a rebrand, we also increased efficiency by 75% because we no longer had each platform taking those tokens and making them work for them. So it was kind of like this play between like quality for the end user with like efficiency internally.
I think you're in those calibration meetings, there's a lot more of those like millions of dollars that everyone made, finding a way to such a fun process. It's finding a way to hitch your boat to that. Oh, hey, that $5 million project you worked on, 75% of it was driven by our design system. So we'll take 75% of that $5 million. Thank you very much. Finding ways to drive home that you are a part of the process, that one other thing worth mentioning is I think the efficiencies that a healthy design system provide are so astronomically high that it seems like video game numbers, to where people start to not believe it. And like when teams ask, what feature do you work on? We work on all the features on all the platforms. It sounds bonkers. And so I think that's another thing, is if you can back those things up with facts, then it doesn't seem like someone's just like flexing for the sake of it. So finding ways to tie directly to that impact that each team is providing, then all of a sudden like, oh crap, they're impacting every single one of these features. This is valuable.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's a hard thing to quantify too, especially once it's established, because again, what we're doing here is talking about savings. And so we're speeding things up, we're doing things with fewer resources. And so those are like the metrics that people care about, is like what kinds of savings, what kind of quality improvements are we getting? They are elusive to measure. And so there's like an opportunity in the, say, first year of a design system, or the first time a team adopts a design system, to measure the before and after. Oh, this type of feature used to take us this many sprints. Now it takes us this many sprints, for example. It sort of tells that efficiency story. What's less effective, but I see a lot of design systems chasing as a metric, is adoption. And that shows the health of the system, sort of how well it's doing. But ultimately, it doesn't tell a story about what the value of the system is at the bottom line. And so I think one of the things that is hard to do is that you're making promises about these efficiencies that you're going to get, but they're hard to measure except immediately for what came before. And once it's established, hopefully teams are feeling the extra velocity and the ease of having this library of solved problems. But it's hard to quantify because now you don't have anything that you're measuring it against except what came before the design system. And once it's established, what are you comparing it to? It's challenging.
I think adoption is going to be one of those numbers that's abused in the near future. But I do think it's really important, because if you're asking engineering for 5 engineers, right, that could be working on features on this new system, and they're like, yo, that's great and all, but like, how do you know this is actually going to be used? We're going to toss 5 engineers for something we're not even sure how much it's being used within the system. Like, that's a tough conversation. And having some heartbeat monitor that, yes, it is being used, your investment of 5 engineers is super valuable, it's showing up. And then when you ask people how much the system is helping speed up your work, you can theoretically, speaking of of squishy numbers. You can correlate like this is the level of efficiency that people provide. This is how much the system is in our code base. Like, like, and efficiency.
And I think, right, it's a little bit sort of like you're kind of intuit it a little bit. It can be
Yeah.
inferred a little bit there. I think though you're also bringing up a good question, which is also that the adoption story helps give teams confidence in it. So especially in very large organizations with lots of teams, I think everybody does this evaluating, I don't know, an open source library, for example. How well is it supported? How many people use it? What's the contribution? What's the health of this system? Because if I'm going to commit my application to this, I want to know it's gonna work in order to support it, unless I'm dragged into it, which then whatever, I don't have a ton of enthusiasm about it one way or another. But I think that sort of storytelling can be really helpful to adoption feeds adoption. You know, the more people use it, the more new people will use it, which I think is important.
I think that points to some, like, a lesson I've learned in the systems that I've worked on is that, like, we always go like full in to building the system before we get adoption. So we have like a full set of color, typography tokens, spacing tokens, like 15 minimum components. And we're like, here, go adopt this. And while that's worked and the systems that I've worked on have been successful, I heard Dan Mall talk about using one very tricky component to prove out the value of design systems, and like finding something that's not like a button, which is like, oh, while it's used everywhere, it's relatively simple to build. But I think the example that he used was like a map that like product teams don't want to build it. It's very complicated, but there's 3 teams that need it. And so if you're able to kind of prove that out at a small scale and then get buy-in and then work from that, it seems like a very interesting way to go. That being said, I've never taken that direction.
We have tried. We've tried to do that as much as possible. I think it is a flat out red flag risk to start making stuff without any idea how it's going to be applied into the system, because you own that now. Like, you've birthed that into the world, and at 3 a.m. when it starts crying, you got to feed that. Like, it's everything that you own now. And so if you're creating things, that means now you're on the hook to support it, maintain it, answer questions. So typically what I'm trying to do in conversations of like, what can we remove from this? What can we get rid of? Because it's just heft. It's heft on top. It's waste. It's, talking about like Toyota being really big about efficiency and reducing waste. It's the same. We got to drink our own Kool-Aid. What waste can we remove from our own system so we're clean burning, so that we can provide as much value as possible?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's like such a common misunderstanding among stakeholders, but even among design system teams. It's like, oh, we're obliged to provide all the UI. And I know that there's like conversation about sort of snowflakes and one-offs, that people are sort of general understanding about that. But no, you're not. You're sort of like, you are curators of the best work and the settled solutions that are common across the suite of applications. It is literally the boring stuff. And, I think, Lauren, to your point, sometimes the hard stuff. That's like, where's the stuff that we're going to get the most uncontroversial leverage out of, is like a good place to kind of start. And in terms of starting up, I mean, you're right. It's like, I think sort of like willy-nilly being like, here's a collection of components that we think will be helpful, isn't a good way for a new design system to start. And I think, like I mentioned about Champagne projects, is what does this project need? And almost sort of starting from, I'm going to build a design system for this project, recognizing that there's going to be some stuff that's unique to that project that shouldn't come into the system, and extract from there, and then on and on. So you're just building stuff that not only will be used immediately, but is for high priority projects, like really providing value and rolling it into the next one quickly.
Also, think about the poor soul that needs to understand all the, like, we have a type ramp of 31 type sizes. Okay, great. So when do I use the 15th size versus the 6th? Like, what the hell? Like, someone has to use this, right? And so it's cool that you made all these things and it looks really fancy in documentation, but someone has to parse that and understand how to apply it. So if we don't have a why for Why, when do you add an icon to a button? When do you add it as a prefix? When do you add it as a suffix? Like all those require best practices and use cases. And so it's very easy to make those things. It's very hard to maintain and distill what the purpose of those are. And that's what designers and engineers need to be effective. And so it is counterintuitive, but the less you ship with greater clarity, the greater value you will have, in my opinion.
And
For
speaking
sure.
of, oh, sorry, going, Lauren.
No, PJ, I think you make a great point. And also, it's not only like training your users how to use 31 different type styles, but also internally on the team, if you're still getting buy-in, like having that much to maintain. There's usually like one person on the team that really understands the nuances of all 31 styles. And if that person leaves and you don't get buy-in, then the team is like struggling to maintain that. I think it's also true in like the Dan Mall scenario that I mentioned, which is like, I probably would never take on a map as a component to prove the value, because like the APIs behind a map would be just like so heavy for a team to maintain long term, and carrying that subject matter expertise and being at the will for anyone who wants to add a feature on it, it seems like an ultimately full-time job, and you might not ever scale to that large type ramp that you want to support.
Yeah. And I think there's a caution here too. It's like people who are attracted to design systems are attracted to systems. And so when we're building it, we just love the system so much. We want it to be perfect, and we hold on to sort of that ideological purity and completeness. And ultimately, it's not about the system. It's like, how can we make it as easy and intuitive for consuming designers and developers to use this thing? How do we, as a design system team, rally toward delivering the best product? Like, I think that's like one of the most challenging things for large digital organizations is getting everybody out of their own heads, including design system folks, to be sort of like, this is about shipping the best possible product in the time that we have to do it, and what is our role in that? How do we support that? And I think that's a big part of the storytelling for getting stakeholder buy-in is this is how the design system team will do it. It is not about our 30 type ramps, and that's our 30 sub type ramps. It's about that rallying toward delivery and how we're going to do that.
So last question from me before we jump into audience questions, because it looks like we have some really wonderful ones. Right now we've talked a lot about like getting investment, getting buy-in. Let's say we have that, and now stakeholders like, cool, start your design system initiative. We usually characterize design systems as like initiatives that you go slow in order to go fast. How long does an organization need, does the team need to invest in a design system in order to start reaping those benefits? Because it's not a week, it's not 2 weeks. So what do you tell your stakeholders of like, give me X amount of time in order to get to X, Y, and Z? How long do you need to make that like champagne bottle of components so that you can really provide like realistic deadlines and timelines, so they're not coming back to you too soon or too late to see about impact?
I think that you can start providing value as a design system project immediately through sort of these champagne projects. You're not going to get the accelerator value of the design system of sort of here's ready to use components that are saving me time by using this pattern out of the box, but by saying we're going to lean into and assist the creation of this and extract those into the new design system, that you're already accelerating value. You're being like, this design system is not going to be working in the abstract. We're going to be supporting and accelerating this high priority project. And then the second project, so say that's, I don't know, say that's like a 4-sprint project. At the end of that 2 months, you suddenly have some ready to roll components that are ready to go. So I mean, I think sort of setting some expectations that it's going, that with a really sort of driven together team, within 90 days, you can sort of start to see the beginnings of this radical reuse. And that after about a year of work, you're going to have a lot of that a lot of teams will be able to pick up. So sort of the accelerating value can happen immediately through simple production support as you're building out the kind of components for specific projects. And then you start to see that really multiplicative effect very strongly within a year, but you should be telling a story of adding value right away.
I think it actually, Lauren, you go.
Oh no, you go. I don't have any.
I think if your company is cool with some level of thrash, you can start to show impact pretty quickly. So, like, let's say you got nothing and you can build out a version 1 or even like a beta version of a button, and then the team can code mod that across the code base and start to consolidate all those buttons. Is that like hold on to your butts YOLO? Yes, it is. It's a little thrashy, but you can get to an MVP state button. I don't want to quicker than a whole design system. I can say that very safely. And then you can start to lead adoption, not through getting everyone on board, but by just doing it. So that's one thing that we did at Pinterest, which I completely disagreed with and then was entirely wrong. It was a great idea where we had contractors that were going through and effectively landing PRs to get adoption into the web code base. It worked out great. And it was because we weren't asking for buy-in and getting everyone in a meeting and like, oh, hey, everyone, is it okay if we like switch over the button? We just did it. There was a PR, it was approved, and then it happened. That approach is a little messy, right? Because you're changing other people's code. There's going to be bugs, there's going to be regressions, but you can see progress much faster than rallying around. So I think it goes back to how comfortable is a company with a little bit of like thrash and chaos to get to that better state faster.
And then it's got a foothold in the code base, right? It's like it's in there.
Exactly.
You're in the front door with something that felt like a minor change in the big picture of things, but it's in there now.
Yeah.
I like.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go, Lauren.
I like what Josh and PJ are saying, and I would add that I think that systems people always think about, like when we talk about atomic design, we think about like tokens and then components and then patterns. But I wonder if when you're thinking about like Josh's example of the champagne project, if you start with patterns as like the place to influence, you start like showing the problem and offering the solution, like through product detail pages, which Josh also mentioned. Like if you start showing that you can create quality and cohesion and efficiency through unifying these product detail pages and putting a systems oriented designer on that project, then you can show value really quickly because that's something that like executives and like the whole company can really rally behind. And then on the like internal side of the systems team, then you start to like piece it down to the foundations that you can start offering right away.
Yeah, I think it's like such an interesting thing too. It's sort of like, PJ, you're talking about starting with buttons to get adoption in there. Let's jam those things in there. By contrast, buttons are a terrible selling point because everybody's like, I don't get it. It's a button. Is that our biggest problem, a button? And so there's sort of like this sort of sales thing of, hey, we can compose this simple page really quickly with this demo we've put together. And if you're a multi-brand company, look, flip a few switches and bing, bang, boom, you've got 4 different screens for the price of one. That those kinds of things. So much of this in terms of selling these is, can you put together an effective demo of this so that it's not in the abstract? I mean, show, don't tell is so powerful here. And, kind of coming back to what we've all been saying, what are the outcomes that people care about? Is it efficiency? Do a demo to show how you can put a page together quickly. Is it about having a multi-brand strategy? Have your theme switching kind of set up, even if it's just in Figma for the moment. They will get it and the bells will go off.
I do think there is extreme value for having your system in code because then you can show the potential. So the way we were able to show with engineering leadership, we just wiped out 8,000 lines of legacy code. That's really real. And another thing is being able to show, hey, we got this button in, and hey, dark mode, propagates everywhere instantaneously. Now let's put on our imagination hats and if we get all the components over, then we get dark mode instantaneously. No one has to do anything. Oh, by the way, it's accessible, blah, 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 blah. There's definitely another layer of selling that you need to have. But what, at least in my experience, having something real in production becomes a lot more, the conversation becomes a lot more real because it's viscerally impacting the product today.
Yeah.
So it's that balance. And like, if you're talking to design leadership, you're absolutely right. They're gonna be like, whatever. Engineering leadership, it's a different, like, I in my experience, that's resonated a lot more deeply with engineering leadership.
Right. This stuff can seem so abstract and hand wavy until you show it. And to your point, the more real, the closer to production, the more people will get it.
A question from the audience. So Maya Hampton from REI asked, adoption efficiency, consistency are lagging metrics. The results pay off in the long term. Any tips for keeping execs appeased when they want to see the ROI in the short term? So in their case, they have an established design system over 5 years old. So I like to think we're shipping ongoing value in every new feature launched by product teams, but there's always this push for more quick wins by leadership. How do we better educate about the long-term and ongoing value of the system?
It's a great point, and it's a hard sell because of those sort of metrics that I was talking about. It's sort of like people get used to the speed that you've enabled. I think part of this too is sort of like there's a kind of a conversation that happens that shifts from strictly those efficiencies to now to sort of like kind of capturing the overall kind of quality of what you do. And there's a balance now between what's happening between production teams working on new features, including the development of new things that aren't included in the system, that you're sort of trying to now educate at how this sort of outer pace layer of fast moving product teams can create new patterns. And then the design system is now capturing those and sharing those out with other teams when there's sort of like good new patterns to do. So really sort of it's part of an education of enabling innovation from other folks, from like the production teams because of the savings that you've created, and how you are now the connective tissue to share those elsewhere. So it's like, great, this feature team that's getting all the attention right now and has the resources to build this cool thing has now made something that we're going to help make available over here and over here. And so it's sort of a quick win as sort of a second tier thing. Is it sort of, hey, we've made this thing and now we're going to make it really easy to get it here, 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 and here, so that there's sort of like a propagation story to tell, I think.
Yeah, I think in terms of educating about long-term and ongoing value, things that I've done in the past include like, what are the ratios of design systems support to the front end and design orgs? Oftentimes that's like 1 to 30. And so if you're saying like, oh, I'm unblocking all of these teams throughout their work, like that points to the support and efficiency that you provide. I've also done like quantitative surveys with my internal users where I report back on those metrics around like helps me work faster, meets my needs, things like that, so that you can see over time the influence that your system's driving. When you talk about like leadership's always focused on the quick wins, rather than creating those quick wins yourself, like find the quick wins that they care about and just like put yourself on them, like anchor yourself to them, demonstrate, as PJ mentioned, like what shadow work you were doing behind the scenes to get that $5 million project at the door.
By the way, shadow work. We need to all just frame that. I love that shadow work. I think Josh has really nailed this in the champagne projects. I think there isn't a more capable team to do horizontal work, a quick win horizontal work. Like, hey, let's change our color palette. Can you imagine all different teams trying to leverage, like trying to coordinate a color palette? Like it is because it's how we do the work. It's bonkers. Or dark mode or an icon redesign. Those are theoretical quick wins that have product-wide implications that would be incredibly difficult to do otherwise. So if you got any like creative director that's itching to do an icon redesign, I would be looking for those sorts of things, especially with a mature design system where you got enough adoption to where you can reasonably execute on that. I think those would be the things that I would be looking for, because it's real visual. It's like, it's right out there.
I mean, I think that's a great, sort of what you're talking about in that example. I see in the chat, Elizabeth is kind of calling this out. It's like, there are opportunities where you can make a design system sell. And that is either we have an upcoming rebrand, or we just went through a god-awful rebrand. And it's sort of, and we never want it to work like that again. What can we do to prevent that horror show from happening again? And I think there's, replatforming. And so there's all these sort of different moments where it's sort of like, oh, we are open to introducing a new system, a new library, a new process. That's sort of anticipating that. You got to get to it in time, or use the last awful experience as a cautionary tale. But those are the things, those are the seams to look for where a design system will be open and welcome.
That's kind of exactly what I used at Dropbox. They went through like a massive redesign in 2017 on their like external work. Collins did it. They offered like 48 different typefaces or type styles, and product never adopted the designs of this rebrand because there were like 3,000 raw color hex values in code. And so everyone that was still around on the executive team was like, we don't want to do that again. We're terrified of that. We'll never be able to ship the rebrand in product. So it was really easy to be like, I have a solution for that.
Yeah, right.
A little
And
bit of
finding,
fear from
like,
past
opportunistic ways.
experiences.
Yeah.
We are almost at time, and there are still lots of questions. Do you all want to do one more, or would you all be open to answering some of them like in a blog post just via text?
Both?
Sure. Whatever.
Cool. In that case, I will ask one more. So where did it go? How do you think about the cost of design system support? So Andrew's team wants to be very supportive of their consumers and users, but sometimes they just need to read the documentation, and support consumes a decent chunk of the team's resources. How do you balance user friendliness with efficiency of support delivery?
We trying to think about how to answer this. I mean, we're constantly trying to make the thing as easy as possible, and we're also constantly trying to do as much behind the scenes as possible so that they don't have to read the documentation as thoroughly as we'd like them to. I do think a mature system that has a strong engagement with its customers and well thought through documentation will see an increase. It's probably never going to be as much as you want, but we're constantly focusing on thinking of our system as a tool, and there's an experience around it. How can we make it as smooth and easy as possible? How can we make getting information as convenient as possible? Like, how can you get that documentation at the place where they want, when they want it? So I do think it's never going to be perfect, but I think if you can make it convenient, spend the time to make it convenient. Like, take that time. It's usually going to be worth the time in the long term.
I completely agree with PJ.
We've all.
I completely agree with PJ. I think that investing in documentation is huge for scaling support. I also have the team recognize that like 75% of your job some weeks is support. But investing in documentation doesn't mean writing paragraphs. I actually think that like paragraph-based documentation is super inefficient. Like, find other ways to provide value, whether that's a bunch of templates or examples of the component in use that designers can like copy and paste, and really see, like, meet them where they are, unblock them without like providing all of the reasoning for why you chose to design this the way that it is in multiple paragraphs.
Bullet lists are your friend for sure. And kind of, what's minimum amount of documentation? Nobody likes to write it. Nobody likes to read it. So how can you make it as pain-free as possible? One thing that I'll also sort of suggest is drive toward answering every question with a URL if you can, because one, great, here's your answer, it's already done. Or I don't have an answer, and so instead of writing up the answer in this DM that nobody's going to see, I am going to take that time and instead post it. Great, thank you. We can see that was missing in the documentation. Here's the answer to your question. And so start trying to do as much as you can to kind of scale that one-to-one service, which is important. And Lauren, you said it, it's like, this is the job. You are a support group. And so that is a big part of it, is like helping people use the system in the best possible way. But if you can sort of scale it and just think, how can I answer this in a URL? Is there a URL to provide? If not, how can I make one right now instead of answering that question first?
That's brilliant, Josh. Love that.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. I know we're over time and folks have work and meetings to head to, but thank you all so much for the time. It was really, really helpful to hear about all of y'all's very real experiences. So much of this is about storytelling and understanding all of your different stakeholders and really meeting them where they're at, playing that politics, and a lot of numbers can be abstracted. So it doesn't need to be quite as precise as you might think. But thank you all so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. What a treat. You all look very nice today.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.